Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Wednesday webinar. My name is Fiona Robinson and I am the series host. The title of today's webinar is A New Era in Menstrual Care, the Revolutionary Science of Wearable Neurostimulation. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available shortly after it ends on the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation website, bleeding.org. We encourage you to ask any questions you may have today. You can ask your question by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen at any time during the webinar. We will monitor your questions, and then following our speakers' presentations, we will put your questions to them. Today, we are joined by Dr. Naveed Kadaparas, co-founder and Chief Science Officer at Spark Biomedical, and Amy Gaston, VP of Strategic Growth at OhmBody. An important note about today's webinar: the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation has a philanthropic venture fund called Pathway to Cures, sometimes referred to as P2C. Pathway to Cures is one of the investors in Spark Biomedical. It is part of P2C's diversified portfolio of investments, fostering the development of innovative therapies and technologies for the benefit of individuals in the blood and bleeding disorders community. The funds provided by Pathway to Cures to Spark Biomedical were earmarked for clinical trials into understanding how their technology can be used for the management of heavy menstrual bleeding. I'd like to thank Dr. Kadaparas and Ms. Gaston for joining us today, and I will pass things over to Naveed now to get us started.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fiona. I appreciate that. And I also want to say thank you to the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation for having myself and Amy a part of this wonderful webinar series. It's just a true honor to be part of this. So as noted, today's conversation, and it's really a conversation, is a new era in menstrual care, the revolutionary science of wearable neurostimulation. Here are our disclosures. Great. So for today's agenda, we have a few topics we'd like to cover with you. I'm going to start off with the company overview of Spark Biomedical. I'm also going to go into this really amazing new topic called the neural tourniquet. And I shouldn't say new, it's actually been studied for 20 years now, but it's novel and it's exciting and it's really an amazing scientific discovery. I'll go through the mechanism of action involving the neural tourniquet. I'll then dive into the clinical initiatives that we've been running for the past couple of years now. And then I'm going to hand it off to Amy, and she's going to walk through a concept through what is known as OhmBody, a women's wellness brand. So just a quick overview of Spark Biomedical. Some of you probably already know all about us, but we really made some have amazing accomplishments since 2018. Our mission has been to transform healthcare by advancing bioelectronic medicine with our wearable neurostimulation platform across our house of brands, which I'll talk to in a second. Spark has really been focused on as a science-driven company, and this has really been evident in the fact that we've continued to run clinical trials over the last 6 to 7 years now, receiving a fair amount of funding, over $22 million of non-dilutive funding from the NIH and DoD and other private institutions. We strive on providing a safe, effective, drug-free alternative to traditional therapies. In the beginning of Spark, we started with our product called the Sparrow Ascent, and this was focused on neurological health. The Sparrow Ascent device is a wearable neurostimulation device that has an FDA clearance for patients that are suffering from opioid use disorder, and they use it to help treat their opioid withdrawal symptoms. We've later moved into more neuropsychological issues that patients undergo or experience, such as PTSD, trauma, and neonatal opioid withdrawal syndrome. In the last few years, we've been looking at how to apply the neural tourniquet, and I'll talk to that here in a few slides, and looking at hemostasis solutions. And this is under our brand called 5 Liters. This is focused on surgical trials, traumatic blood loss, and then obviously something that's of passion for NBDF is bleeding disorders. And the last brand that Amy will talk through at the end of our presentation today is OhmBody. OhmBody is a very exciting opportunity for us at Spark. It's a women's wellness initiative focused on menstrual health excuse me, endometriosis, and a specific rare disease that we've been looking at carefully now called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So just a little bit more background on 5 liters. As I mentioned, 5 liters is our hemostasis initiative. We're looking at how to apply neurostimulation to promote hemostasis and improve bleeding disorders. This stemmed from a wonderful partnership from the Feinstein Institute. And the Feinstein Institute is up in New York. They're part of the Northwell Health healthcare system. And they've been working on for the last 20 plus year on an idea called the neural tourniquet. And most of this research has been focused in the preclinical setting. This 20 years of work has culminated into a Nature Communications publication, which I'll talk to today. But the idea is to demonstrate that vagus nerve stimulation can improve platelet function, creating faster and stronger clots. 5 liters has taken this technology and this intuition and scientific advancement and pushed it into clinical trials. So not only are we looking at translating it from preclinical to clinical, but then also understand, can we take a invasive technology such as devices that need to be implanted into your body, and then have it be through non-invasive wearable stimulation. And so here are a list of clinical trials in the surgical space with some of our partners. But then we have also work being done with the Department of Defense looking at traumatic blood loss and non-compressible hemorrhage. And then today, obviously, I will be focusing on women's health, specifically women that are suffering from bleeding disorders and also have co-occurring heavy menstrual bleeding. So as I mentioned, the neural tourniquet is extremely exciting to me. This, I think, is one of the most amazing scientific discoveries in the last few decades. And I have to give a lot of credit to one of my co-scientists at Spark, Chris Dura, for some tremendous work that he's done, and some of his colleagues at the Feinstein Institute, which has been focused on how to deliver stimulation to the vagus nerve to improve hemostasis. And so if you look here, you can see we have a brain and then the vagus nerve, which is coming out of the brain. It's the only cranial nerve that leaves your skull. And in these animal studies, we were able to show that if you deliver electrical stimulation directly to the vagus nerve, and again, these prior studies were using invasive VNS, so the cuff electrode on the vagus, applied there through surgical methods. If you deliver electricity to the vagus nerve, it's shown that it can travel down the vagus nerve, and then it can take a hard right, if you will, via the splenic nerve, and then it can intervene with the spleen. And the spleen is a really fascinating organ. It has a lot to do with our immune system, but it's also very much responsible for hemostasis. At any given time, there's roughly about 20% of our overall platelet storage in the spleen. And within the spleen, the neural tourniquet pathway is as follows. So the signal comes down the vagus nerve to the splenic nerve, and then there are T cells. These are specifically cholinergic T cells that release a neurochemical or a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. And then acetylcholine can then bind to these cholinergic receptors on the platelet. Okay, I know that's a lot, but we're boiling it down is essentially this pathway can then allow for a high level of calcium to be released within the platelet. And this is what we call primed platelets. And these prime platelets can then go off into circulation. And in the case of an injury, so you can see here, there's a vessel injury. These prime platelets are able to bind quicker and stronger to thrombin, thus creating a faster and stronger clot. And this effectively reduces bleeding. And so this is what over 20 years of research has been able to show. And then this figure was recently published in Nature Communications as a way of demonstrating the mechanism of the neural tourniquet. Most of these preclinical studies were fairly elegant and simply designed in the sense that in rodent trials, either animals were getting either active stimulation, so again, stimulating directly on the vagus nerve, or they were getting sham. So no stimulation was delivered. Just a few minutes of stimulation were applied prior to an injury. And then in the pig models, You can see here that they have a considerably higher amount of stimulation, roughly about 30 minutes of stimulation prior to the injury, but also randomized into active or sham. So looking at the preclinical study in pigs, this was an ear resection model. Again, the vagus nerve stimulation was delivered prior to the injury. And so if you're looking at the plot here, you're able to see that there is the vagus nerve stimulation animals are in the black squares, whereas the Shan animals are in the open diamonds. And you can see there's a significant reduction in the bleeding rate when you compare the two groups. This essentially equates to a 43% reduction in bleeding time, and then also about a 46% reduction in the amount of blood loss suffering or consequential of this injury model. Looking at another animal model, this was a really interesting study in the sense that it wanted to understand if the neural tourniquet could confer treatment effect in a what's known as a transgenic knockout model of factor VIII. This is essentially an animal model of hemophilia A. And you can see that wild type animals are the ones that are of normal, so they have factor VIII. And the animals that had sham stimulation had a significantly higher amount of blood loss following a tail transection. Now, when you're looking at the vagus nerve stimulation animals, there really isn't that much difference in terms of how they are compared to the wild type animal, meaning they're bleeding no different than an animal that does not have hemophilia A. But there is a significant reduction in the amount of blood loss when you compare it to the hemophilia A mice that had no stimulation prior to injury. Now, in terms of trying to really understand how does the neural tourniquet work, and our hypothesis, which is now becoming ever more strengthened, and we're feeling very confident that the effects of neurostimulation is being transferred to the platelet. This was a series of experiments that really helps us understand that this is true. And so in this study, you can see that we're looking to understand if the spleen is necessary for being able to transfer the signal from the vagus to the platelet. And you can see here that animals that had an intact spleen, there was a significant reduction in bleeding time. But in animals where the spleen was removed, you can see that there was no difference in the amount of bleeding time. So this study really helps demonstrate that you do need a functioning spleen in order to transfer the neural tourniquet effect. Going a little more deeper into the spleen now, you can see that animals that have a chat positive, so again, these T cells here, this blue little circle is a T cell. That's the cell that releases the acetylcholine. If that cell is removed, then you can actually see that the effect is lost. So again, the signal's coming down the vagus. If it removes the T cell, you don't get the release of the acetylcholine, thus it does not bind to the platelet. Now, going to the platelet itself, looking at the receptor, so that's this green receptor here. This is the cholinergic receptor on the platelet. You can see that animals that have that receptor present on the platelet, then they have a reduction in bleeding time, whereas animals where if you remove that receptor, essentially in a knockout model in mice, VNS does not work in terms of improving hemostasis. So this really gives us a very firm understanding that the signal from the vagus nerve is traveling to the spleen and eventually priming these platelets to be able to be effective, more effective at hemostasis. Now, all of those experiments, as I mentioned, have happened over a long series of time. There was two gaps in terms of understanding how do we translate this to humans. So one, the first gap is obvious. It's going from preclinical research to clinical research. So if that's from animal to human. The second gap is really looking at how do we take this from a non-invasive approach. So instead of requiring a surgery to implant a cuff electrode in the neck, can we do this non-invasively? And so there are multiple strategies on how you can modulate spleen function. One we've already talked about, which is cervical vagus nerve stimulation. Uh, Two could be splenic nerve activation, so directly putting a cuff electrode and delivering mild stimulation to the nerve. Three is non-invasive. It's through focal ultrasound. This is actually a pretty hot area now. There's a lot of research going into this, but it has some limitations in terms of the ambulatory approach, meaning not you have to have some healthcare workers to be able to help you guide this and ensure you're targeting the exact spot on the spleen to be most efficient. But today, obviously, we're going to be talking about auricular neurostimulation as a completely non-invasive approach that allows patients to actually provide their own treatment and not requiring a physician or a healthcare worker to be present. So this is a term that we are well published on, and we've been using in many different clinical trials called transcutaneous auricular neurostimulation, or TAN for short. And we want to be able to show that TAN has a way to bridge the gap, right? So number one, can TAN be used in clinical trials to promote hemostasis? And then number two, can we activate or prime the platelet? So again, by stimulating the branches of the ear, can we send a signal down the vagus nerve and modulate the spleen? And so the device being shown here is what is known as Sparrow-Ascent. This is our FDA cleared device, again, for different indications. So this is investigational for all of our hemostasis clinical trials. But the idea is quite simple. We have three different electrodes. Two of them are targeting specific cranial nerve branches. And so you can see the electrode that's right above your ear canal is being used that activates the cymba concha, which is a branch of the trigeminal nerve. We actually have studies where we are activating the same nerve from behind your ear in order to provide a little bit better usability for patients, and that's shown to be quite effective. The other branch that we target is the auriculotemporal nerve, which is just right in front of your ear. This is a branch of your trigeminal nerve. So the device is effectively able to stimulate both of these cranial nerves through hydrogels in a very comforting way without creating any, again, obviously not requiring any surgical intervention. So our first clinical trial to look at this, as titled here, is the first in human study to look to see that can we modulate the platelet via auricular neurostimulation? And the study participants were healthy volunteers, and the study was conducted at the Feinstein Institute. So again, this is the institute that started the idea of the neural tourniquet. And we partnered with two great investigators there, Dr. Lionel Blanc and also Dr. Jared Houston, who's a trauma surgeon. Dr. Houston is also one of the founding scientists for the neural tourniquet. The endpoints for this study were mainly biomarkers, so looking at blood biomarkers and specifically assessing platelet function and clotting potential. And so we had participants that came into the study that received sham stimulation first. They were blinded to this. And then following a period of time, then they received active stimulation with the device. There again, no injury models here, just looking at and doing blood draws to look at the platelet function. And so really kind of looking at baseline is 10 minutes before sham stimulation. Our sham control was 10 minutes after sham stimulation, and then we had comparator groups for active stimulation at 10 minutes, 60 minutes, and 120 minutes. And so I'm happy to say that this study showed some very interesting results and very confirmatory results that we are able to activate the neural tourniquet via your ear through the auricular branch of the vagus and trigeminal nerves. And one of the markers that we were very excited to see an upregulation on is a glycoprotein. specifically glycoprotein 2b3a, which you can see is a receptor on the outside of a platelet. And its primary function is platelet aggregations, essentially making platelets more sticky, and they can help improve clot formation. And so you can see in this on this graph on the right, in comparison to sham stimulation, we had a significant increase in GP2B3A at the 60-minute time point and also at the 120-minute time point. This is also really interesting because that effect has shown to also translate into a clinical effect in the sense that physicians and healthcare workers are constantly looking at an outcome called thromboelastography, which is a very, very complicated. I'm not going to go through this chart on the right here, but there's a lot of information that physicians are able to be able to gather in terms of your clot potential. There's various different aspects to this. The one that is of importance is maximum amplitude. And so maximum amplitude is a measure of the strength and firmness of a clot. And so for participants that received active stimulation in comparison to sham, you can see that we had a significant increase in what's known as TEG max amplitude. So for the first time in humans, we've seen an upregulation in terms of clot strength, and also clot firmness, that is being translated from the ear to the platelet. So I'm going to switch gears here, looking at another clinical trial, but this is in a diseased population. Specifically, these are women that have co-occurring a bleeding disorder and co-occurring heavy menstrual bleeding. In terms of the bleeding disorder, they have what's known as von Willebrand disease type 1. And as many of you know, this is the most prevalent bleeding disorder in the world. And frankly, one of the most underlooked bleeding disorders in the world. And so this was a very interesting population for us to start our clinical trial work on. But we really were focused on the outcomes regarding heavy menstrual bleeding. Can we improve not only the amount of blood loss they are losing via menstruation, but improve other aspects regarding pain and quality of life? This clinical trial had 16 subjects that were in it. Eight of them were in the VWD and HMB group, and then another eight were in the heavy menstrual bleeding of unknown cause, meaning that this group of women had heavy menstrual bleeding, but it was not affiliated to a bleeding disorder. Um, their baseline month was their first menstruation. So during their first menstruation, every day they were collecting outcomes regarding their blood loss via the PBAC. PBAC is the pictorial blood assessment chart. It's essentially a visual way of understanding the saturation level of the menstrual product being used, and also can quantify how many clots they had and the type of product they were using to manage their menstruational health. We also, during the baseline month, collected various different components of menstrual symptoms. Some of it is cramp pain, but there's other areas like irritability, time in bed, and there are various other domains to that, the CMSS. And then the quality of life using the SF-36. So after the first month, we would have a baseline for all of these outcomes. And then the second month, the second consecutive month, we would then use the device to provide treatment. The treatment was essentially two 60-minute stimulation sessions a day. Usually it was one session in the morning for an hour, and then the participant would use the device later in the day, in the evening, let's say, and do a second 1 hour session. They would do this every day that they're menstruating, and then they would stop using the device after they are not required or they're not having any more menstrual symptoms. This is just kind of give you an idea of some of the consort. We definitely had to screen quite a few patients in the VWD. We screened 108 patients. Of that, we had about 15 that were consented, and then we had 8 of them that completed the trial. In the HMB of unknown cause, 51 patients were screened, 14 consented, and then 8 of them completed the trial. So let's go to the exciting part. Here's the data. And so when we're looking at the women that had heavy menstrual bleeding and von Willebrand disease, we look at what you're seeing here is the PBAC and then the duration of their menstruation. So focusing on the PBAC, to give you an understanding of the level of blood loss we're looking at here. These are women for you to be diagnosed, or the clinical definition of heavy menstrual bleeding is 150 or greater on the PBAC. Um, the women that at baseline would have VWD and HMB, they had roughly about 1,250. And this is almost about a liter or a little bit more than a liter of blood loss in a 7 to 10 day period of time. This is obviously very debilitating for these individuals, but also can be much of a health risk for them due to that level of blood loss. When we look at the amount of blood loss based on the PVAC following their treatment month, so you can see that they have roughly about 540 on the PVAC, which is equating to about a 57% reduction in blood loss just after 1 month of treatment. When we're looking at the duration of time, so again, the way that we defined it is you start menstruation. That start time is when they are required to use product, and their last day of menstruation is the last day they are required to use menstrual product. And you can see here that we had about a 20% reduction in the duration of their menstruation time. Looking at the women that have heavy menstrual bleeding of unknown cause, again, looking at blood loss and duration, one thing to note immediately is the baseline is significantly less. We have about 1,250 for the VWD group, whereas in this cohort of women, we're about 650, so almost half of that. And so you can definitely see there could be some correlation with the bleeding disorder. But nonetheless, in terms of blood loss reduction, we had about a 53% reduction in blood loss for these individuals, and roughly about the same 20% reduction on duration. Lastly, I'd like to point out, again, this was collected through the CMSS. Essentially, it's a Likert scale. And so you can look at cramp severity scores. So how severe was their cramp pain during menstruation? 0 would essentially be none. 1 is mild, 2 moderate, moderate severe, and 4 would be severe. You see most of these women at baseline were about moderate severe, coming down to closer to mild severity in terms of cramp pain. This is about a 58% reduction. And then in women that have heavy menstrual bleeding and of unknown cause, we're getting about a 31% reduction in cramp pain severity. Okay. So to summarize really quick, the preclinical work has really defined the pathway. We have a very good understanding of the neural tourniquet and the mechanism of action and how neurostimulation can promote hemostasis. The hemophilia mice models have shown us that the neural tourniquet can be delivered in the absence of factors. So we do not need to go through these intrinsic or extrinsic pathways. And then the clinical trials have now become confirmatory that the neural tourniquet does exist in humans. So this is a big win for us. Neural tourniquet can be activated non-invasively. So these are those 2 big gaps I was talking about early on that we've been able to close the gap on. The phenotypical change in healthy humans has shown that we have a way to prime the platelets. And then lastly, women with HMB showed significant blood loss reduction and cramp pain improvement. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. I'm very excited to hand it off to Amy Gasson, and she's going to talk about OhmBody, which is an amazing opportunity that we have going on at Spark.
Yeah, thank you, Naveed. I always feel like I learn. I hear you talk about this all the time, and every time I think I learn new tidbits. So thank you for that. Yeah, welcome everyone. We're so honored to be here. I serve in a capacity where I get to storytell about this incredible product and this incredible movement we have at Spark called OhmBody. If we can go to that next slide, there we go. So as we all know, or the women at least on this call know, menstruation is not simply a bleeding episode, right? There are a host of things that come along with that. Um, Aside from being heavy bleeders and the hospitalization, the anemia, the tiredness, the physical results of bleeding heavily each month, we also have a myriad of symptoms that come along with that. So you can see this kind of on our circle of pain here: food cravings, bloating, tension, anxiety, fatigue, trouble sleeping, mood swings, cramps. Naveed hit a little bit on that around the cramping piece, but that's just a small portion of the experiences a woman has each month as they menstruate. And quite frankly, for many, many years of our lives, for most of us who are healthy women. And so as we looked at that, we really thought, gosh, we want to be a part of that solution. And to date, any of these individual symptoms can only be treated by hormonal birth control, some sort of pill or medication, invasive, oftentimes invasive surgeries, or topical treatments like a heating pack or being told to rest or put your feet up. So, really exciting to think about the fact that OhmBody has a solution that can do all that can really address the entirety of this circle, and with that potential to address that in a real powerful, real science-backed, zero systemic side effects, no hormonal treatments, and non-invasively. So if we can go to that next one. Naveed, so why is this important? Why is it important for us to tackle this particular space of bleeding disorders, and then just women, as Naveed said, who have heavy menstrual bleeding without any sort of clinical diagnosis? Why is this important? Because for millennia, women have been heavy menstrual bleeders or bleeding unhealthily or having unhealthy menstrual cycles, and these are the kinds of things that we're being told, right, by our doctors, our family members, our moms, even, right, to get over it. That talking about it is kind of dirty and taboo, and it's normal for you to bleed, right? Well, I was a woman. I was as your mom, I bled heavily. So this is just normal for you to bleed as well. And so we really have this kind of taboo area around menstrual care that, even to the point, I don't know about you, but I was told to hide my tampons from my boyfriend and make sure I didn't see that and put it in my back pocket to go to the restroom, right? So there's this real hush hush around the topic of menstrual care and heavy menstrual bleeding. And what that does, it just perpetuates this idea that what we're experiencing is normal, when in fact we know that that's not true. If we can go to the next slide, Naveed. Even the NIH, right, the government organization who's supposed to exist to help us kind of manage and walk through and navigate various diseases and conditions, even they have some really interesting and I think almost laughable approaches to how to manage heavy menstrual bleeding. So these are directly from their website, and how to respond on a particularly bad day. One of them: make sure you're always close to a toilet, because that's always convenient in the life of a woman who's busy and a mom and a CEO and a fill in the blank, whoever you are, living your best life. You could use a sanitary pad as well as tampons or a menstrual cup. So double up on those products, spend that money for menstrual care products that are very pricey. It may be a good idea to always keep some spare sanitary products at work or in your handbag, just in case. Not that we don't already do that, but thanks NIH for letting us know that. And then here's this one. This one's always my favorite: to wear dark trousers. I don't know about you, but I love a white pant and a white short. And being told that I should wear dark instead during my menstrual cycle is always a little frustrating. And this isn't a knock to the NIH. I think that, in a time when there just aren't real solutions, helping women try to manage that has just been the best that people can do. And I think we're just destined for something a little different. Naveed, if we can go to the next. On top of just these really wild suggestions from the NIH, there's real practical results, real consequences that come from heavy menstrual bleeding. In the women that kind of identify as excessive symptom patients, there are research that shows that studies have shown that those women miss on average about 8.9 days of work every year. And when you take that from an employer standpoint and what that looks like in money and in real dollars, that comes out to about $44.5 billion in lost productivity every year in the US alone, just because women are missing work because of their periods and that are unmanageable for either heavy menstrual bleeding or severe symptoms and cramping and and fatigue. And then you look at individuals here, this, even if they are attending work, there's still real disturbances to productivity, right? You can see here effectiveness in or effects in concentration on work, energy levels, interest in their own work, their mood, their relationships. So even if you're sitting in your desk while you're on your period, there's a good chance that you're not optimally performing. But at OhmBody, we believe that it can be better, that women deserve better, and it's about high time that we give better. And so at OhmBody, our mission is to transform women's menstrual wellness through science-driven, drug-free neurostimulation solutions that provide real relief, balance, and control. And you heard Naveed talk about all the science and the real things in that. And I think that's the part that I'm most proud of this company, is that it's real science-driven solutions. And our vision, truly, for our hope for the future of women in their menstrual journey, is a world where every woman thrives in harmony with her body's natural rhythms, free from limitations, fully supported, and empowered to live life on her own terms. Because we think women deserve that. And after millennia of chasing down lots of solutions that aren't good for us or that are ineffective, we're really excited to bring something to market that is effective. So we get this question a lot. As Naveed talked about, we have a different use case in some of our technology that is FDA approved. And so the question that we get a lot is why not wait and be FDA approved in OhmBody as well? And the answer is simply this: because can we can solve problems for women today, right? Women have waited, as we've talked about, for too long, and we have a real solution that can go to market today. And so we're going to hit the market as a wellness device. And what that means for patients and users is that you can go direct to consumer, coming to our website and buying that product directly, and not having to wait for a doctor to make that prescription for you. Now, in the interim, and that product will be available early July of this year. So just a few short weeks, and we're really excited. In the interim, though, the research will continue in a myriad of other use cases and indications, as Naveed kind of spoke about earlier: endometriosis, PCOS, perimenopause, adolescents, HMB. We think there's a tremendous opportunity to help young girls as they navigate their first few years of menstruation, and postpartum hemorrhaging. And so all of that research will continue with the goal of being FDA approved, but hopefully remaining over the counter at all costs, so that we further remove the steps and kind of the barriers to entry into utilizing a product like ours. We would encourage you. I think that Fiona's going to drop the website in the chat and then send it out afterwards. We would encourage you to visit ohmbody.com and to learn more and check out the product yourself and see if it might be the right fit for you in your menstrual journey. I think those are all. I think that's it. I think we're open for questions.
Super. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that presentation. A really interesting look at something new, a really new technology, learning about how it works at the science level, and also thinking about how it might actually intersect with the daily reality of menstrual care and what that looks like. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Just before we go to our Q&A, I want to draw our audience's attention to the chat, and I have dropped a link into the chat. You should be able to find that at the bottom of your screen. There should be a little icon down there for your chat, and you should be able to find that. First, there was a link that I dropped in that takes you to the OhmBody website, and then I just added another one with the link to the Pathway to Cures in case you want to learn more about that. And I have also put that into the comments in the live Facebook and LinkedIn events. So that's all set. So yeah, let's start with our live Q&A. And maybe I can start with a question that came in about the trial that was done with the people with VWD. I may have missed this. There's a kind of a lot of information there, but so you were looking at the impact on their symptoms. Were they receiving any other treatment for their VWD to help manage their VWD, or was this the only intervention?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the women that had von Willebrand disease and co-occurring HMB, they were also required to be on some form of hormone therapy. So that was part of the inclusion criterion for that cohort. For the idiopathic or HMB individuals of unknown cause, We had challenges with the prior VWD women group because not a lot of them were willing or on hormone therapy as a treatment. So there were some enrollment challenges. So we decided for the HMB group of unknown cause to open the inclusion and not require hormone therapy as a treatment, as a way of managing their menstrual health. So for that group of women, they were using over-the-counter medications to help with cramp pain and other issues that they may be experiencing symptom-wise. Um, so essentially, you have one group of women VWD that had hormone, and then the women that had HMB of unknown cause without hormone.
And so then how do you work out what the impact is coming from? Is there a way to kind of separate out which of the treatments are having the impact that you're seeing?
Yeah, no, good question. And so for the women that we were using the device plus hormone, it's almost as an adjunct therapy. And so again, they were using its treatment as usual at baseline and then treatment as usual during the treatment month. The only difference between the baseline and the treatment month is the addition of the device.
Okay.
And then the same for the heavy menstrual bleeding of unknown cause.
Okay. So this is sort of, you can kind of separate out the variables in that way.
Exactly.
And another question about the studies, how long did they run?
How long did they run?
Yeah, how long were the studies?
Oh, the study was roughly about a year from, starting enrollment to closing out.
Okay. And were there any adverse events or side effects that were observed during that time?
No, the only device-related adverse event that occurred in the trial was related to skin irritation or discomfort. And so there's the electrode that went just above the ear canal, targets the Simba concha. For some women, they have a smaller region. It's just due to a smaller ear size,
Okay.
and it caused a little discomfort. Again, mild, and it resolved on its own without any intervention, which is why now I didn't talk about this clinical trial, but we do have an ongoing clinical trial right now that's looking at activating the same nerve just from behind your ear, improving usability and obviously giving patients a more comfortable way of using the earpiece.
Okay. So there is ongoing studies, things are going on for a bit longer because I guess a year or so you might not come across some of the more uncommon side effects, for example. You might not see them within a year. So
Right. And, we have also about 5 years of clinical trials and other
okay.
indications that have been using the same technology
Mhm.
for, varying different mental health and neurocognitive issues.
And coming back to the women with VWD, was factor replacement therapy, was that an exclusion for the participants, or did you have some participants who were using factor replacement?
It was non-exclusion.
It was not exclusion. Okay, great, thank you. Um, Maybe a few more practical questions. Someone's asking, is it possible to test the device before purchasing it?
So I'll answer that one, if you want me to.
Yeah, go for it, Amy.
Yeah, that's great. So our device comes with a 45-day money back guarantee. So when you purchase the device, if for some reason that it doesn't work for you, because we recognize there's a good chance, I mean, there's a chance every woman is different. So if you don't find the kind of relief that you're seeking with our device, we do have a full money get back guarantee of
Okay.
45 days. Mhm.
And so I know you talked a little bit about testings and approvals. And so is this something that would go through FDA approval, like a medication, like a factor or an antibody, or is there a different sort of an approval process that's for this sort of a device? And have you gone down that road at all? Has it been through some sort of
So,
safety and efficacy
yeah,
testing, like evaluation, the way we understand that drugs are for FDA?
absolutely, yes. So if we were to go after a specific indication, so for example, if in the heavy menstrual bleeding studies, we are looking at running phase 2 clinical trials. These are pivotal studies that would focus on the medical condition known as menorrhagia, which is heavy menstrual bleeding. And then we may even look at dysmenorrhea in terms of cramp pain. And so if we went after that, these studies would be designed with a primary indication or primary endpoint specifically looking at menorrhagia. And then we would then submit what's known as a de novo application to the FDA, which will then give us a regulated product on market for prescription. What OhmBody is now focused on is more of a wellness approach, meaning we're not diagnosing or treating individuals. We're really focused on the wellness component, the women's health component of menstruation, and providing them a tool that they can use to manage their symptoms that are related to their day-to-day menstrual issues.
Okay. And so when it is available, will it have the same sort of recommendation as in the study, the idea of using it 1 hour twice per menstrual cycle? Will that still be the recommendation that comes with the product?
It'll be a 2 hour usage per day,
Mhm.
every day that you use a menstrual product.
Okay.
Yes.
So I have questions about
Yeah.
this. Just from my own personal point of view, for example, I have tried a patch to deliver some kind of medication for something, and I'm a pretty active person. I sweated that thing off in no time.
Yeah.
And we don't usually mix electricity and water. Like, can you wear this thing and sweat like I do, or
Yeah.
take a shower, or go for a swim?
Okay, you can do anything but shower and swim. We will
No
have
showering, no swimming.
no showering, no swimming,
Okay.
because that feels dangerous. But working out, absolutely. I'm pretty active. I play tennis. I lift daily. I go for long walks with a weighted vest, and I wear mine during those processes. And have been perfectly safe. We're going to have two different adhesive stickiness versions. So we'll have an active, which sounds like Fiona, you might need the active if you're pretty active, or if you live in a very humid climate, we would also recommend something with a little more stick. So yes, there will be an option for those women because the idea of the brand, a lot of period care products currently well-intentioned are very cuddle up, have some chocolate, get under a blanket and cozy up. And that's just not who we are at OhmBody. Our tagline is because life doesn't stop when you start. And we're firm believers that we want to give tools to women to help and empower them to get on with doing whatever badass things that they're doing. I don't know if I can say that word on this. I'm so sorry if not. But they're awesome lives and go be a CEO, go be a mom, go be a high-performing athlete, go be a fill in the blank. And we want to provide tools that are discreet and easy and lightweight for you to be able to use without missing a beat in your day.
So even when I go play ice hockey,
Now ice hockey,
maybe not.
we could chat about that, but I'm a little nervous about some of that water, although hopefully your ice isn't melting just outright.
No,
But
that's more like me, like missing my mouth with the water bottle.
oh yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah. So
probably
maybe not that.
But it wouldn't, for example, it would be under the helmet, so you wouldn't be worried about
Yes, it would be, and it's
impact
very
there.
discreet. Yeah, and Naveed showed a picture of the original earpiece, and so it's very similar to that, just without the Symbiconcha piece that goes into
Yeah.
your
And
ear.
you don't have like a wire going down to some battery pack somewhere.
You do, yeah. So it's but it can be worn. So I wear mine under my
Okay.
sports bra when I wear it,
Okay.
and then I just put it in like a spy belt when I go
So you
for a
can
walk.
tuck it away. Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a lot of equipment in hockey, so I'm sure
Yeah,
there's like in there somewhere.
for sure. I'm impressed that you're a hockey player.
Yeah, not a good one, but and what about like, can you wear it when you sleep? Could you like put it
Mhm.
on and go to sleep?
Yeah, a lot of our patients wear it when they sleep. A lot of our participants and our own staff who wear it will wear it through the night.
Right. I think at one point I saw something about a reduction even on the first day of your period. Does that mean you need to be wearing it before the first day of your period, like in anticipation, or it's your period starts and you put it on then? Because we don't always know when our period's going
Yeah,
to start.
absolutely. So there's a couple of answers to that. Yes, first day of the period, put it on within 30 minutes. And if you check my facts here, but within 30 minutes, your platelets are primed and ready to go. And so the additional hour and a half that we recommend wearing it is really to help with cramp reduction and kind of that pain reduction so that your body has time to balance your nervous system out. But we have staff members who wear it leading up to their period because their cramping is more severe there. So really what we love about the OhmBody and taking it as a wellness device approach is being able to allow women to customize their treatment and their usage to what their body needs.
So there's no harm to wearing it a couple of days before you start your
Mm,
period.
absolutely not.
Interesting, yeah. Um,
Yeah, one thing we're looking at is, even looking at the, like kind of the luteal phase and looking at some of the symptoms that are prior to your actual menstruation. Obviously PMS, a lot of individuals and women experience this. So it's something that we haven't studied in our clinical trials. Everything has been right now focused on just the days of menstruation and how to help those symptoms.
mhm.
But now we're expanding to, prior to menstruation and even after menstruation.
It's an interesting point because I was wondering as well, we're talking about this really in the context of a bleeding disorder and dealing with the
Right.
bleeding, but um, if you have like heavy cramps, or if you have more of an emotional response, that's really the thing that you're struggling with? Or can you use this device for those symptoms, or is it really just about the bleeding?
No,
Wendy, you want
it's
to tackle
all
it?
of
Yeah.
that. Yeah, it's everything. I didn't talk about there's so many, we just submitted the heavy menstrual bleeding study to a good journal for review right now. But in that study, in the manuscript, we're looking at GI discomfort, right? Whereas we know that's one of the higher, when you look at the list of symptoms, it's definitely high on the list. Overall symptoms, mood, cramp, pain, neurocognitive, looking at emotional irritability. Um,
Cravings.
Cravings,
Yeah.
yes, also on that list. These are all symptoms that we've been able to show an effect on. And then obviously just quality of life, right? I think sometimes we overlook the standard quality of life assessment. And at the end of the day, clinical trials are there to improve quality of life. And we get so focused on primary endpoints, but QOL is just as important as a number on your PBAC. And so I think in terms of quality of life, we've been showing that we can improve or reduce the amount of time in bed. Presenteeism and absenteeism is a big issue for women that have heavy menstrual bleeding. They lose work. They can't take their kids to school. There's a lot of issues that are just outside of the domain of a clinical trial that we're hoping that OhmBody can be able to make a massive effect on.
And it seems to have this impact on heavy menstrual bleeding. What about other bleeding disorders and other bleeding symptoms? I mean, what about somebody with hemophilia and joint bleeds? Is this potentially something that can help them as well?
Yes, I absolutely think so. Especially with the animal work, looking at transgenic knockout mice for factor 8, which is essentially hemophilia A, and showing that in that we've been able to reduce blood loss and make them look like wild type animals. That gives us a lot of promise. We haven't studied this yet in clinical trials. We've only focused on uh, VWD. Um, but hemophilia A comes up a lot. Postpartum hemorrhage comes up a lot. This is a big, big problem in the United States. It was like, I believe, one time the leading cause of death in women in the US, which is unbelievable to think about. But it's a big problem. And I do think that that fits under, again, that 5-liter bucket of surgical. And, it's definitely a women's health problem that we need to solve.
We've got a question from someone who's watching on Zoom asking whether you can foresee studying this product, particularly on females with hemophilia A.
We do, yeah, we definitely do. And we have quite a few friendly hematologists that we work through. Some of them through the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation that have been great stewards in making sure that we're focused on the right patient population. And so, yes, we definitely are looking at using the technology for other bleeding disorders, and that's including hemophilia A and B and C.
And someone else has let us know that they've heard about vagus nerve stimulation being used to improve sleep. So is it possible that people might purchase this device and use it, even if they don't have a bleeding disorder, to deal with other issues?
It's definitely possible. And yeah, I think I saw that clinical trial that was published recently for VNS and insomnia. And we've also seen it in our opioid use disorder population and how it improves their sleep. Again, I think this goes into that bucket of quality of life, right? A lot of
Sure.
times, if you're able to ameliorate the symptom, patients feel better, they recover better, they sleep better. And so is it directly being used for sleep? It's hard to say. But yes, it definitely has shown translation into improving sleep outcomes.
I mean, on a related note, I've heard of a discussion around vagus nerve and an importance in long COVID. So it's certainly a nerve that's involved in a whole lot of things, right? So when you stimulate it, what if you have some other bleed, like you're taking it for your heavy menstrual bleeding and you have a joint bleed? Does it impact that too? Have you been able to look at that at all?
So if you're like looking at polytrauma, we have some DoD friends that have looked that we're having discussions with, looking at various polytrauma effects. This is any multiple organ issues or multiple bleeds occurring at the same time. The answer would be it should, right? The platelet is not going to discriminate on where the bleed is.
Mhm.
And so if it's floating by and it happens, the signals are there and it goes into from a prime platelet to an activated platelet, then it's going to clot. And so it shouldn't matter if there's multiple bleeding locations. And if you think about that, even just people that have arthritis, those are micro bleeds all over the body. And so your platelets are constantly plugging these minor holes, tiny little nanoscopic holes. So yes, it should be effective in that population as well.
Okay. Just from my own sort of geeky point of view, you showed how the platelets are primed to go and assist with wound healing, but your period is not exactly the same as getting a wound, right? It's a programmed bleeding that starts and stops in a way that's not exactly the same as a traumatic cut that then you get this wound healing response. So do you know if it's really doing exactly the same thing there?
Yeah, so we were definitely studying that further. But the way that we look at menstruation is like for example, we're using a device in a surgical setting, which is a very defined moment of time when there's trauma to the tissue that causes bleeding, and then
Mhm.
that's it, right?
Right.
Um, Whereas with menstruation, it's a recurring bleed, right? This is continual. It's a hormone-derived physiological event and also neurologically driven physiological event that creates, the endometrial lining to be shed, and that shedding process is what we believe is where the bleeding is occurring, and that's exactly the point where we think the platelets are able to help reduce the blood loss.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is why we recommend wearing it every day because it is a recurring. So I just want to plug that in, Naveed. That's why
Yeah, no,
you're
yeah,
required to wear it every day.
most of the applications for the neural tourniquet have been prophylactic, short amount of stimulation prior to the injury. But as Amy, I'm so happy you said that. For this application, we're delivering it every day for a couple of hours a day because if you think about it, as women do menstruate, they're losing blood, so they're losing some of these platelets that may have been primed. And platelets only live 10 days. So they're also naturally going to be losing, as platelets die off during their menstruation. So we constantly keep priming the platelets so that we have these prime platelets that can go in and create a better hemostatic event
And so you're suggesting to wear it every day of your period or every day, every day?
Every
every
day of
day.
your period.
Okay.
Any day that you're using a menstrual product is what our recommendation is.
And
Yeah.
I know this might not be a quick question with only a minute left, but have you looked at all that it impacts on iron deficiency? Is there anything there other than, in reducing total blood volume loss? Is there anything that you can look at in terms of iron deficiency and how it might impact that? Because that's often something people struggling with heavy menstrual bleeding are also dealing with.
Yes, absolutely. So the current studies did not look at that, but we are partnering with others to understand how it can affect with anemia and hemoglobin issues that can be a result of heavy menstrual bleeding. So yes, so that's definitely high on our list and built into our future studies.
Great. Super. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'm sure we could keep chatting, but thank you so much. I really want to thank Amy Gaston, VP of Strategic Growth at OhmBody, and Dr. Naveed Kadaprast, co-founder and Chief Science Officer at Spark Biomedical, for sharing your time and your expertise with us this afternoon. Also, a big thank you to Pathway to Cures for their support of this initiative, and to you, the people attending this webinar. Thank you so much for being there. This recorded webinar will be available shortly on bleeding.org under the Events tab. If you select past events, you can find all of our archived webinars there. And you can also go to that same place to find out about upcoming webinars. Do come back next week when we will learn about core VWD and the future of VWD clinical trials, centering the patient voice, from Mark Skinner, Elizabeth Clearfield, Vaiba Zimeli, and Dr. Paula James. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.